Welcome to the podcast Sandbox with Michael Hatch, where we playtest new ways to structure debate and discussion in an effort to develop new and better methods of communicating ideas. This is a special ChangeMyView DeltaAllStars episode. Have you ever had someone tell you outright on the spot that you changed their mind? It's pretty rare, right? Well, what if you knew someone who changed hundreds of minds, and not in an audience or on the news, but individually, one-on-one, on specific and unique occasions, and on dozens of widely various topics? Well, the top-ranked Delta earners of Reddit's ChangeMyView subreddit have accomplished exactly this, and the magic is all right there for public viewing in text for the 211,000 subscribers to Reddit.com's ChangeMyView community. Today, we will explore the art of that seemingly impossible task of getting someone to change their mind from a Redditor who has documented proof of accomplishing this on 198 occasions. This DeltaAllStar is also a ChangeMyView moderator whose self-declaradly unpronounceable username is spelled huadpe. We'll pick his brain and discuss some of his experience with ChangeMyView and highlight one of his favorite earned deltas and how that all went down over the course of several days. It was a really thorough delta earning. After that, we'll explore our differences on the future of the human condition and whether we'll ever see an end to scarcity or to definitional confusion. After punching above my weight for the better part of 2 hours with huadpe, what's left of my mental horsepower engages with him in a bit of meta epilogue to the discussion and the conceit of the podcast in general. Thanks very much for listening and enjoy. Welcome to the first of our podcasts featuring our high count Delta winners on Reddit, ChangeMyView. A brief explanation of that is basically ChangeMyView is a subreddit where people will propose a point of view with the idea that they are open about, willing to, and perhaps even wanting to have their mind changed about that particular point of view. I joined as a moderator about 6 months ago, and it's a pretty strong subreddit, 200,000 people, and it's just a great place for pretty reasonable conversation, one of the nicer places on Reddit, in my opinion. And I was a huge fan of that subreddit before I became a mod, and I think so. Today we have one of the other moderators who has how would you pronounce your Reddit handle?
It cannot be pronounced.
Okay.
This has come up many times because I use that handle for a number of things, and you can't pronounce it. It's huadpe. Don't try. It has enough vowels, it has enough consonants, but it just can't be done.
Gotcha. Well, I guess for our purposes, what would you like to be called? Just while we're here today, Peter. Cool. All right. Peter. Well, groovy. I know. I just wanted to be careful about whatever anonymity. All right. So yeah, I think that covers our brief intro, and I guess this is just all. We'll turn it over to Peter, and basically, Peter, we'll just want to take a few minutes here. If you could please just kind of tell us whatever you'd like about yourself, and then a little bit about how you found ChangeMyView, and anything else you want to share.
Sure. I don't know exactly how I found ChangeMyView. I think I saw it on the front page or something at some point long in the past, but I thought it was a very interesting forum. I have, I guess, a pretty good background for getting a lot of points on ChangeMyView. I have at least some level of formal or significant informal training in philosophy, law, economics, physics, and that's, I guess, the main stuff, and a few other things. I'm kind of hobbyist in political theory and that sort of thing.
Okay, and just for our listeners' benefits, I did miss something in the intro, but maybe you could say it in your own way. What is a delta?
Sure. So they're basically internet points. On ChangeMyView, people post their view, and if you change it, they can award you. They put a little Greek delta symbol in the comment, and that gives you internet points. And so it's kind of a way of rewarding people for productive comments that actually effectively change someone's view.
Okay, so basically, when you've changed someone's view or some part of their view, you get awarded a delta, and then there's a mechanism within ChangeMyView that counts up these deltas. And so for anyone out there who sort of feels like no one ever changes their mind, how many deltas have you acquired, Peter?
As of this evening, 125.
Okay, so for those listening, 125 times just by Peter, minds have been changed in a day, right there on Reddit, and you can see it. So,
not 125 in one day. That would be ridiculous.
Yes. On individual occasions, yeah.
Yes.
All right, so that's sort of why I think this is interesting to go into, and why we started this was really. I don't think there's anywhere else where we can really delve into actual provable examples of when people have changed their minds with this degree, and someone might go through a lifetime and not change as many minds. So how long have you been at it?
I don't know exactly, probably about a year and a half or so. Yeah, I'd say somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 months.
Yeah, so over 118 months, and that's really something. So anything else you wanted to add before we jump into kind of that example of you changing someone's mind?
I did actually, kind of interestingly, I emailed an economist who I'm a fan of, saying that they might use ChangeMyView as a data source. I'm not sure if anything has come of that. They put it on their blog if anyone was interested, researchers, whomever, but it might be an interesting data source.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. Well, I'll have to check that out myself, and sink my teeth into it. So, all right. Well, you've so Peter's provided a link to a delta that he says he's pretty proud of. So I'm just opening that up now, and so maybe Peter, I'll just describe a little bit of the context of what the original OP posting was, and we can go from there.
Sure.
Cool. So I'm just going to figure out where that page just opened up. And here we are. It's loading. All right. So the original post is from 11 months ago, and the poster, Reddit user by the name of, it's just loading here, Cakeball, Cakeball, proposed the following, and it's brief, luckily. So, ChangeMyView, organ sale should be legalized. And this is Cakeball speaking. Right now, 18 people die every day because of a lack of organs. Organ sale is probably an effective way to fulfill the need for organs. Specifically, I think a system of legalization like Iran should be implemented. In Iran, the potential seller approaches the government, and only the government, and sells his or her organs for a predetermined price, in addition to health insurance. There are restrictions in place, including the recipient cannot compensate the donor, and recipients must be Iranian citizens. Iran is the only country without a waiting list for kidneys, so it's apparent that it works. In addition, there are several other benefits. Organ selling creates a much larger supply of organs. This gives a transplant teams a much wider array of options in terms of compatibility with the recipient, which translates to higher survival rates. Legal organ sale throughout the government eliminates the need for the black market. So now this will be unusual for this podcast. You've decided you picked an example of someone giving you a delta who was not the OP, but rather one of the other posters. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, so part of why I like this one a lot was that I happen to agree with the person who was the original poster, and I did not challenge. One of the rules we have is you have to be, if you're going to post a top-level comment, you have to be challenging them in some way, so that it doesn't just become an agree fest for if you have someone who has a very popular view. So I didn't make a top-level comment, but someone else had come in and was challenging them, and I ended up in a conversation with that person where I, after quite a bit of back and forth, did end up changing their view and taking someone who had not been open to the idea of organ sales and making them say that at least they would strongly consider it in certain circumstances.
Right on. Okay, and then how would you, just to go over the OP's claim one more time, maybe if you wanted to just perhaps restate that in your own words so our viewers just have a good lock on what they're proposing. So
they're proposing that not without any regulation, but that at some level, one should be allowed to make a live tissue donation. So there are certain organs which one can donate without dying. Liver, kidney, part of your liver, one of your kidneys, and I think there might be one or two other things. I'm not medicine is not one of my areas of knowledge, really. But you can donate a kidney, you can donate part of your liver. I know that much. And there's quite a bit of shortage of kidney donations, and people die on waiting lists. And so this person was saying that people should be able to get paid to donate organs, because right now that is illegal under at least U.S. law and pretty much everywhere. It is a crime to pay someone for a organ or any part of their body.
Okay. And does that just out of curiosity apply to like hair?
I do not believe it applies to hair.
Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, let's move into it then, and we'll just kind of as we're scrolling down here, and we'll post this link later on the website. So now I'm just going to go one up to the parent here, and we can start with who you're responding to, right? Which is Crispy3D. Now, is Crispy3D responding directly to OP?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. So, well, why don't I just go ahead and read Crispy3D's part, and then you can sort of just walk me through after that.
Sure.
And so, I don't want to do it verbatim, but you can sort of you can tell the story as it goes, and I'll just sort of set it up. So this is Crispy3D, like it sounds with a K, who writes, by this logic, all jobs that pay more due to risk of injury should also be banned. That's a quote. Yep, they're quoting someone above them. And Crispy3D is saying, gainful long-term employment is a dangerous job cannot in any way be compared to the one-time windfall earned from willingly going to the knife to sell an organ. And now we're quoting again. Crispy3D quotes someone above him, depriving people of the opportunity to engage in the market, make their own choices, reduces their agency, and disrespects them as individuals. And this is the last bit from Crispy3D. This is a totally valid political opinion that many uphold. But it's still true that such an organ selling system would be expected to depend upon poor people selling themselves. The market can certainly take advantage of these people if they're willing to be taken advantage of. And I'm just saying, I think it'd be better if we don't go there at all. So basically, Crispy3D is saying this just opens the door for the exploitation of desperate people, similar to arguments against legalizing prostitution. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's fair. And the bulk of our conversation ended up being about the idea of exploitation. And so now I don't think that the transaction is inherently exploitative. I think it's possible that a transaction like this could be exploitative, but I don't think that it's inherently so. The main reasons are that someone who is selling an organ obviously is coming from a situation where the money matters a lot to them. And so there's a natural tendency to think that that's bad, that we don't want it to be the case that someone who is that desperate for money that they're going to sell a part of their body. It's visceral. But at the same time, if someone is that desperate that they want to sell an organ, that giving them that money is, in a way, it's alleviating a very real need. They're telling me that this matters a lot to them. And there's a very real sense in which it's disrespectful to them to say that your decision about what matters for you and what's best for you doesn't matter. I, from outside of you, know what's best for you. And so we got into a lot of conversations about, a long conversation about, whether or not that could be done. And a lot of this boiled down to what I think was key to it was the idea that I was not proposing unregulated organ sales, the idea that anyone could just buy and sell an organ from anyone else, completely without any intervention. Rather, the idea was that a complete ban on organ sales is the most restrictive possible regulation. Right. You can go anywhere. When you're talking about regulating something, you can go anywhere from completely unregulated sales to a complete ban, and there's a large spectrum in the middle there. And given how important the organs are, that people are dying because they can't buy an organ, it's really, really important that if there's any way, even with stringent regulations, to find a way to make those transactions happen, you're saving lives, a lot of lives.
Okay, so now you sort of would you say that you gave sort of a broad overview then just now of kind of the full arc of where you're coming from? Yeah,
I'd say so.
When you're first responding then to the limited point that Crispy made as far as the danger of exploitation, where you on some point right here, this is a delta that you're proud of, and so at some point you're opening up and you're starting to consider what do I include and not include in my response. Like sometimes when I respond to a CMV and I'm trying to change someone's view, I end up going way too long, or I'll go all over the place, but you seem to have a very succinct style where you've got it just a nice neat package. So how do you kind of make that first decision in this case?
In this case, it seemed like this person was having a bit of back and forth, and so they were open to back and forth. And so I basically said, okay, what's the thing that I see as the critical question? And I thought the critical question was the one of exploitation. That seems to be really where they're coming from as far as why they think this is wrong. So at first I start at, so I so I asked first, just in to ask them, why do you believe that this is taking advantage of someone in a morally problematic sense? And that kind of opens it up to see where they are on this, that I can then look at to see what might be persuasive and what's important to them in this that might be factually wrong, that might be there might be some ethical case against or some different way of looking at it. So I want to see what's important to them so that I can challenge, so I can be on the same footing as them, because I'm coming from a different perspective, obviously.
Okay, so you're kind of searching out what's that thing that maybe, I think there's strong evidence that a lot of our decisions and what we tend to really even get emotional about often is a decision made kind of beneath the surface. We aren't choosing it totally logically. It's more like we're the press secretary than we are the president. We're telling the story after the fact, after the decision's been made. Do you subscribe to some idea of that, where if you can just get to that one thing under the surface that piqued them that maybe they're not even sure about, or is this more just sticking on the surface to the words, to the topic?
I mean, it depends on the situation. I would say, especially in a text format like that, it's very, very hard to read someone's mind or get into their individual psychology. I'll generally take people at their word.
Okay.
And it's obviously,
I agree.
Yeah, I don't try to delve into the other person's psychology really now. I'll try and I'll ask what's important to you, but I'm not going to challenge that, as it were. That doesn't work.
And I agree with you, because I think it does speak to a larger, more important aspect of argument in general, which comes from a place of sort of at least operating under the idea of mutual respect, that we're all choosing together and trying to figure this out rationally. Like if we can at least attempt as that to being the procedure, it helps, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's honestly especially it would be pretty hypocritical in this case, because a lot of my point boils down to, we don't know better than the people making these decisions. It would be kind of hypocritical for me to go and say, well, I know better than you as far as what's going on in your head.
That's interesting. Yeah, of course. Cool. Okay. Well, so this first sort of rebuttal then that you've come back, you're quoting his last one where he said it's a valid political opinion. They're just worried that people are going to get taken advantage of. And so I won't redo this on all these, but I'll just read your first reply so that the listeners have some idea of sort of your tone and how you write and all that. So, so this is Peter, redditor HUADPE, responding. So as a holder of that political opinion, though not the OP, why would I change? Why don't you say it? It's you. Sorry.
So I said to him, so as a holder of that political opinion, though not the OP, why would I change my view to yours? So I'm inviting them to come back at this. And I say, to do so, I think the crux of it is to support your assertion that the market is taking advantage of individuals in this case. If they're informed and they think the benefits outweigh the harm, why is that taking advantage in a morally problematic sense?
Nice. Okay, so at this point, do you see any cracks, or is it still pretty?
That I haven't really seen a crack, or I'm opening them up to see what cracks there might be. That's the purpose of the question, because I framed this purely as a question, not as a.
Yeah.
There's a little built into the question, but I'm saying why. You've said you don't subscribe to this view. This is the very basics of the view. Why don't you subscribe to it?
All right. Well, why don't we, just because imagine like we're sitting with Tiger Woods or Michael Jordan, and you're sitting with them watching a replay of one of their best games, right?
Yeah.
Basically, they'll be walking you through in a way that teaches you, because I want to learn to be good at playing basketball, and I can sit there with Michael Jordan and he walks me through what's going on in his head, what he thinks is going on in the other people's,
Sure.
And just kind of what you think would be valuable to tell about the story, and okay. Walk me through the highlights there. Yeah.
So Crispy 3D answers that there's something that there's a desperation element to it. That they're saying it's not like playing the lottery, where it relies on that they're not blowing a few bucks on a scratch ticket in the lottery. They're undertaking a really substantial risk out of desperation, and that's kind of inherently exploitative. They say that it's not a genuine volitional engagement in the market because of that desperation that they have. And so I looking at that, this is where I start to get into the regulation kind of part of it, because it matters in this case, because it could be their point is valid. It's not, this is not a crazy point to make.
Right. Like there's sort of the reality of, is an addicted heroin user like truly able to make market decisions about heroin or that kind of thing.
Right. And so what I reply to them is I then start going into a bit of the detail of what I know and what I quickly researched about the screening process. That you can't just walk up and sell an organ. You have to meet with doctors. You have to meet with social workers. You have to go through multiple meetings. There are mandatory cooling off periods where you can't just do it in one day. It has to be over a period of time. You have to have time to think about it. You have to have time to not get caught up in the emotion of the decision or any moment of desperation. And then, so that part of that is just setting up that this is not, that there are systems in place to try and prevent that. And then I go on to say, given that it's the case that it's a considered, a well-considered decision with proper consultation and proper information, and that any number of factors will prevent you from donating an organ under current law, or would prevent you from selling if you applied the same laws to sales. That whatever is making them so desperate is important to them in a very real sense, and that it's disrespectful to them to say that important thing is, but we know better than you.
Yeah. So applying some basic standards of, reasonable layperson, whatever the proper psychological term is, person of has their wits about them, whatever.
And so they replied to that, and they say that that the safeguards themselves are disrespectful, and based on they're trying to point out hypocrisy on my side, which is fair. To say that the standards themselves are disrespectful in as much as they're requiring consultations and all this, that, and the third, when shouldn't we just respect their decision and let them go through with it immediately? And my retort to that is that, well, we do that all the time in much less charged context than organ donation. The specific example I gave was, people use lawyers all the time. They use professional consultation all the time. The mandatory example was in New York, you happen to have a lawyer with you when you close on a house so they can explain the contracts to you and explain what's going on to you. It's required that you have an attorney for you at the closing when you're buying a house. And buying a house it's a big decision, but it's not nearly as big as selling an organ or donating an organ. And if we can require people have an attorney for buying a house, we can require that a consultation for selling an organ. And we aren't saying that house buyers are disrespected in New York because they have to have an attorney with them.
Right. So it's just a matter of due diligence, and sort of it walks a fine line, because it does seem to acknowledge an imperfection to human free will. There's the rational actor thing that you see in some very super libertarian philosophies, or
the fundamental precepts of economics.
There you go. Yeah. But as we move further into the science of the brain, we learn more about sort of the biases and things that can get even perfectly healthy, normal people's ways. And so it's sort of acknowledging the respect for the individual to make the choice, but also, this is a cooling period. Works good for everyone,
But that ultimately, if we're going to respect anything, we have to respect a well-considered decision with proper consultation and proper information. If you don't respect that decision, you don't respect that person's decision-making at all, is kind of what I'm getting at. That's like the Uber decision to respect is one that's consulted at that level.
Right. And so would you say that type of decision, I guess a person would be more entitled to own versus a decision like which candy bar to buy, because it's so core to their person, I guess? Or is it more tenuous, but it's just able to slip past the wire? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I guess I don't think that the idea of, in some sense, the idea of owning a decision is genuine. I'd say I'd contest a little bit the idea of owning the decision.
Yeah, I might have phrased that better. I know that's sort of playing off of a bit of a colloquial understanding of it, but I would say that. Sorry. So if we continue on, what should happen? Yeah.
So then we kind of get into more of a pure ethics question. So they're saying, so they come back and they say that this is that they do kind of agree with my point, but they're still concerned about the idea that basically only poor people are going to want to sell organs, and that is itself an issue.
And which number are you on the thread here, or not a number, but I guess what is the just open with?
It says, I'd again agree, but remember, I'm not saying we should allow organ donation for everyone but the poor. I'm saying the risks of if you open this door to everyone, it's going to be basically particularly the poor who sell their organs, and that makes sense. It will be the poor, relatively poor people who sell their organs, because that's who's going to want the money badly enough to do that thing.
It would be a natural emergent property of such a system, however fair.
Yeah. And so I kind of make a consequentialist utilitarian response to that. I explicitly say so. That, if someone's selling their organ, it may be pretty close to a wash for them, depending on the amount, those taking a small but real risk.
Yeah.
And being well compensated for it, but it may be, of small net utility gain to them on their side. On the other side, for the organ buyer, for the organ recipient, the benefit is enormously huge.
Right. There is no greater benefit available to human experience, which is to continue living.
Right. I mean, there are senses in which we do put dollar values on human life. Let's not kid ourselves.
There's a FEMA number, I think, or something, isn't there? Like
about 6 million.
6 million. Okay.
I actually cited it later in the thread.
Nice.
But we do put values on human life in quite a number of contexts. But it's high. It's very, very high. Certainly any dollar amount we put on human life is going to be very high. But beyond that, there's a even if we say it's a kind of marginal cost benefit value on the seller side, it's a very, very large benefit on the buyer side. And if we're utilitarians, we would say that, well, the seller is at least even, and the buyer is way, way up, and so the total is way, way up, and so we're happy. We like that from a utilitarian standpoint.
So just kind of to break it up a little bit, because we just went through a lot of detail stuff, just to kind of keep the pacing in a good place. I'm wondering if you could tell me your internal monologue here, not about the thread and the debate itself, but anything that you're thinking of as far as like, I've got to respond to this guy now because I probably got a 2-hour window before I lose this guy. Or
this actually happened
at work. Where are you sitting? Like, give me that kind of picture.
I mean, this is a while ago, so it's hard to remember exactly, but I usually try to be prompt, or at least I try to, people lose interest in things, so I tend to reply pretty quickly. I have all the mods on my thing now, so I see, pops up when someone has replied to one of my posts. But this actually did take place over like 2 or 3 days. This person was replying to me. So
really? That makes it more interesting. Okay. Yeah,
this was not particularly quick back and forth. It's also like 15 comments back and forth, which is quite a lot for Reddit.
That's a lot for any Reddit. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So I make my utilitarian consequentialist point, and they say, "You're correct, but I'm not a utilitarian."
Now I got to the bottom here and I'm not seeing your delta.
Yeah, you have to keep going.
Oh, continue the thread. Oh, I'm rookie.
Yes.
Give me the opening words of where you're at.
So I say, so I've just said my utilitarian point there, now saying, in reply to that, that's all very, very well put, but it does rely on consequentialist utilitarian and quite optimistic viewpoint, which I don't share.
All right, this is you, Peter, saying, well, I'll cop to be an optimist.
Yeah, so I reply to their point about I'm basically not a utilitarian, and they're saying that that putting these people at risk is a moral bad, even if the benefits on the other side are very, very large.
Okay. So they're sort of worried about the hospital ER problem with
the trolley problem, or one of the many variants of the trolley problem.
So it's like the difference between an institution acting versus an individual acting in a one-off case.
Sort of. I think more fundamentally, so there's a very famous problem in philosophy. This is something that deontologists, which is kind of a rule-based ethical system, use against consequentialists, which is a more just do the thing that has the best consequences. Very famous philosophy case called the trolley problem, which is you're in a little control booth or something. There's a trolley coming down the tracks. The brakes have failed. It's coming down the track downhill at very, very high speed, and it's going to hit 5 people who are standing on the track and don't realize it's coming. You have a lever. You can pull the lever. It'll track change. It'll go off to another track where one person is standing. Should you pull the lever?
There you go. So it's on its way to kill 5 people, but you have a chance to change fate, send it on the track down the one person who was otherwise totally safe, in order that the 5 aren't killed.
Correct. And so this is usually the utilitarian. So people's instincts about this vary. But there's another case called the hospital problem, which is a variant of the trolley problem, which is what I thought you were referring to.
They're usually used kind of in pairs.
Yeah, so the hospital problem is a perfectly well woman comes into the hospital for a checkup or something, and you, or I don't know, by some hook or crook, she becomes unconscious, and the question is, you have 5 patients, all of whom are exact matches for her organs. Should you harvest her 2 lungs, her lungs, her kidneys, her heart, and whatever to save these 5 people, killing her? And I think all of us have a pretty visceral, no, you should not harvest this otherwise perfectly healthy woman who can for a checkup. You should not harvest her organs to save 5 people, even if it does save 5 people.
Right. And then, of course, the questions come like, well, what if it's your mother that needs the organ or will die? Or,
Right.
They'll come at it from every angle, and then people give like wildly disparate responses based on.
Yeah, and I've seen I had a course in college where we had an entire book about trolley problem variants.
That sounds like fun, actually.
It was a little bit fun. It got a little overdone after that. After the 8th trolley problem variant.
Like the diagrams start to look like a new kind of science. It's just like, anyways, obscure reference. But all right, so going back to
they're making a point that we shouldn't chop up the one person to save. They're basically making that sort of a point that even though it saves more people, that the net benefit is larger. It's not okay to put people in a risky situation like that, to put people at substantial risk of life for that.
Yeah, so there's a classic rebuttal to utilitarian that fails to truly understand utilitarianism.
Yes. My point that I come back to is about knowledge, essentially, is that my point is we don't know what's best for any individual person. I probably don't know. You probably don't know. I'm very sure the government does not know, but they probably do know. And so the question is, should we, through the government, tell them what to do, even though we and the government do not know what's best for them? And I'm coming down on the no side.
Mm-hmm. And now you are, just to keep up, so our folks can keep along as we're going down the thread. Where are you at?
That would be where I say I'll cop to being an optimist.
Okay, so we're right there. Cool.
Yeah, then that's where I just made that point. Now they're basically saying that our philosophies are a little bit too different here. We're probably stuck.
And that's right where you want them.
Not really. I'm so convinced about that point.
Okay.
So I say, we've gotten a little abstract, and I kind of say, all right, I basically make a strategic decision. Let's see if I can bring it back to more concrete. So I basically say, I think it will benefit all or nearly all organ sellers. And my reason is that by consenting to it, and after consultation and everything, they're telling me that it's a benefit to them. That's what their consent means, is they say, that's them saying, I believe it's a benefit. And so my question, I basically pose the question, what are the reasons it would make the seller worse off, given that they've told me they think it makes them better off?
Right. And so it would be now put back onto Crispy 3D that they would have to sort of somehow do the job of weighing the benefits of that person. Maybe that money helped they put their kids through college. How do you weigh that for a mother or father versus the somewhat higher risk of kidney failure late in life? But yada. Okay. Yeah.
Or there's a small risk of dying on the table too. Anytime you have surgery, like it's less than 1%, but more than a 10%, I think, is the numbers. But it's not trivial. Certainly a 1 in 1,000 chance of dying at least, and that's enough chance for people.
Is it that high? Wow, I didn't know that.
1 in 1,000. I mean, 1 in 1,000 is not very high for surgery, but you're talking about major surgery.
Fair enough. Yeah.
You're cutting someone open quite large and taking out. You get an infection. Things happen.
Especially if it is happening in the second world, or I shouldn't say second world, developing world.
Yeah. So So their response is basically that you think that they thought they would only be experiencing net benefit if the price were outlandish, like $500,000, $1 million. And to which my response is, okay, let them sell organs for $1 million. Basically, nice. So basically, the actual this is where I get to the
Hemingway gambit.
Yeah, well, I get to the actual, we put very large dollar values on human life. If you're going to save an adult human life, or a human life in general, we will put $1 million value on that in many cases.
And a debate's gotten to a good place when the word actuarial pops up. Like I'm in at that point.
Yeah, and I bring up again that the ban is the most restrictive possible rule, and that even a rule setting a price floor at $500,000, $1 million is less restrictive than a total ban. They come back with a little peaked because they're like, but then only millionaires could buy organs. It would be horribly unfair. And I get my last point, which is the one that wins. Health insurance pays for it. That's what health insurance pays for. Health insurance legitimately would pay for that. That's the health insurance. And because they happen to be in the US, I'm pretty sure by that point,
right,
we just passed Obamacare. Everyone can get health insurance. So everyone can get an organ who would need one because they can have health insurance, and the health insurance will pay for it.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead, if it's all right with you, and just read the Delta reply.
Yeah.
Okay. So now this is the reply by Crispy3D. The explanation, and by the way, if you ever give a Delta, please remember to put an explanation. As a mod, that would help us a lot because it's a requirement rule thing. Just a little bug here. All right. Delta awarded. And then here's the response. All right. I've been mulling this over. And you earned this because you had meaningful retorts to every one of my qualms with this proposal. My view has been changed, not because I'd be apt to vote for a proposal which would legalize organ sales, but because after this chat, I'd be much more keen on checking out any such proposal's details. And in the event that it satisfies my concerns in many of the ways that you described throughout this lengthy ordeal, I might actually consider supporting it. On the face of it, I'm not in favor of this concept whatsoever, and I still see my concerns as legitimate and requiring careful examination before undertaking such a market scheme. But properly handled, I bet it could save some lives at a greatly minimized potential cost. Sounds good to me. Now, is there a joy you get in reading those?
I did enjoy that one quite a bit. That was that
was nicely written.
Yes. Yes,
I feel like you could hang out with this guy and you guys would be cool.
Yes.
Or gal, or
whoever.
Yeah.
Person.
So have you ever encountered Crispy3D again after this?
I don't think so. Judging by the fact, I can see that right now they have 3 deltas. Don't think they're too active on ChangeMyView, and
okay.
I mean probably a little bit, but I don't think I remember running into that username again.
All right. And so as this last piece comes together, are you seeing this 3 moves ahead, or did you did you expect that answer at that point? Did you feel like you checkmated, or did you feel like they were going to go a few more rounds?
I honestly didn't know. I should have, but I don't think I did anticipate but only millionaires can buy organs there.
Because that to me made it sound like this is going to go on.
Yeah.
It sounded like there was a button there hit, and there's some. I mean, I got to give some credit to Crispy3D here that. I didn't see that coming in, and they sort of, I don't know how I guess they just kind of had their thoughts so organized. They're like, well, I guess I had 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and 0.4, and I guess we were voted all 4, and I guess I'm out, and all right, you got me. Like, man, if people could do that more, wouldn't it be something?
Yes. All right, so I think we went vastly over the amount of time we expected to talk about that.
You're right. So I'm just going to mark it into this segment then. I'm kind of keeping, I failed to keep time in the last 10 minutes, but I'm glad you called it out. So we our next, and let me know if you have any limitations coming up. Our next segment, our idea was unrelated while we were talking about this. Peter and Peter had made a comment, and I said, man, about something to do with efficiency in his workplace, and I just said something like, man, I can't wait for the end of Scarcity. And I sort of, it was a weird response because it sort of didn't connect all the dots that you would know what I'm talking about. So I sort of clarified, what I meant was that the efficient thing to do in the office to me is sort of like a miniature model of the efficiencies of the future and everything that'll be automated. And so ostensibly there'll be so much work getting done by automation that there'll be just like all this leftover wealth and stuff and food that 1% of GNP could handle the basics of, food, water, shelter, medical care, basic transportation, and some small meta spending money, using only 1% of GDP if we continue to grow exponentially and population starts to level off. So I didn't explain it in that much detail at the time, but basically what we was saying, Peter was saying that, well, speak for yourself.
Okay. I was saying that I do not think there will be, in a meaningful sense, an end to scarcity. I think there'll be increases in wealth. I think the economy will likely grow over the long run. And, there'll be some levels of automation, there'll be productivity increases and all that good stuff, but I do not think you'll see any sort of a fundamental economic change whereby you don't see the principles of scarcity in play as far as what drives the economy.
Okay, so then just for point of clarification, so everyone knows what's going on, for this this last section will drift into sort of a conclusion about this that'll go meta and kind of where it goes, and then we'll cut it when we cut it. But basically, we're going to do a CMV here. So I'm the guy saying, here's my opinion. I am of the opinion that if I were a betting man, I would bet that in the next 50, maybe 100 years, the current growth trends I see tell me that basically there won't be, the work left for people to do will be things that people really like to do, or at least a lot better than things are now, but we'll have enough money and prosperity and raw wealth coming out that we can handle a planet's worth of basic needs for all human beings. So he's basically saying I'm that's not where we're headed. So I guess how you want to take a first stab at this as a responder?
Sure. So the idea I think revolves around two things. The first is that basic needs are in any way static. This would be my first challenge, is that what we define as basic needs constantly change.
I can see that.
And change so drastically that you will not see them shrink. You will see them shrink to an extent, but they will not shrink to anywhere the degree you're talking about. For my primary example here would be medical care. Medical care consumes a large and increasing portion of the economy. If you look at the percent of U.S. GDP, U.S. is a very inefficient medical system, but if you look at the percent of GDP for pretty much every country, every Western country in the world, GDP spending, percent of GDP is at least static, if not rising, pretty much everywhere. We are getting much better medicine. We have longer lives. We have healthier lives. But we're not having cheaper medicine. We're not spending less resources on medicine. And the standard of what constitutes basic medical care has drastically increased. If you supplied to poor Americans today the standard of medical care that was available, not even, even with modern knowledge, if you supplied the resources of medical care that were available in 1945 to poor Americans today, you would be excoriated. It would be malpractice to say, no, you can only have an X-ray, you can't have an MRI because the MRI is too expensive.
Right.
That would never happen.
Yeah, this goes back to the chilling effect problems of the hospital organ problem, which is basically, if the technology exists, if we're going to cover it all, we have to give it to everyone.
Right. Well, and that essentially there's a very real sense in which modern wealthy societies simply are not willing to let people die on the street. We just don't do that. For instance,
we don't. I've seen at least one dead person on a street in a major first world capital, but maybe unfair because it was New Year's Eve in the Millennium in London. So I know homeless people die like in the cold and stuff, but I think that's not to your point. Your point's saying that we have a certain standard. Yeah.
Yes, people. It is not impossible that someone literally dies on the streets in a Western country. But the point is rather that there are a large number of institutions and a large number of people working very actively to prevent that. You can't do it perfectly, but for instance, in the United States,
got that covered.
In the United States, you have to try to starve to death. We have food banks, we have homeless outreach, we have food stamps, we have emergency assistance of various sorts. you have to and people do, because mental health, and it's there are many tragedies around that. If you are not actively refusing help, you are not going to starve to death in the United States. There are safety nets for that. You just walk into it. If you walk into a hospital and you are going to starve to death, you will stop starving to death. They will give you food. Like that will happen if you are getting to that point. Like it.
Yeah.
There are institutional supports surrounding the idea that we don't. We at least structurally try not to have that happen, and that will continue. And those institutional supports are going to demand that some level of whatever increases in productivity and increases in standards of things go to that. So you could see this even in food. Mm-hmm. What constitutes food support today? The food stamps program is a pretty successful program, but the food stamps program, the variety and the variety of foods, the quantity and variety of food that's available to someone on, getting whatever equivalent of public assistance is much, much greater than it was 40 or 50 years ago, because we are more productive. What food means, food is a very, very basic thing, but what food means has changed in the past 50 years in a really big sense. Housing is a case where, there is an inherent scarcity problem in the form of land. Land prices will not get cheaper. Housing can get a bit cheaper because we build towers and we're pretty good at it.
And you're not talking about temporary fluctuations, you're just saying long term.
I'm saying long term. We're not making more land. We're not making large amounts of more land. And so, education wasn't a basic necessity 200 years ago. Most people didn't go to school 200 years ago. Education today is a basic necessity we consider basically a human right. Most Western countries write it into their constitutions or in the laws at some level that everyone has the right to free public education to some degree, to high school, college, whatever level that may be, depending on the country. And so that's going to, again, become part of the basic needs package. So the idea that everyone's basic needs will be satisfied from a very small percent of production it's not going to happen. We're going to set these new standards for basic needs. And the idea that you could even buy the old package is basically going to go away. Okay. The old package stops existing. You can't buy 1940s medicine anymore. It's not for sale.
Yeah. So it's all or none, I guess.
Yeah.
If you're providing, which I think, trend-wise, we can probably agree that the U.S. will pretty much be on a European model within the 15 years. Is that?
I wouldn't go that far. Defining a European model for what exactly?
Everyone gets United Kingdom, like Canada.
You're talking just healthcare, or
healthcare?
So this is something just that is a bugaboo of mine. The United States does not have a meaningfully different social safety net system from other Western countries except for healthcare. That
makes sense to me. Yeah,
I've lived in Canada. It's basically the same damn system as in the United States except for healthcare.
Yeah, I would say my understanding is about the same. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like there's this great different European social safety net system. There are differences in laws, but there are differences in laws everywhere. The fundamentals of the system are basically the same in the US as in other Western countries, except healthcare, because we have a fucking stupid healthcare system. Sorry.
I know there's real problems. No, that's fine. It's fine. There are real problems. I think a lot of it has to do with the way that bidding is done and group bidding. I just sent you a link, by the way, to a graph that backs up your point. Would it be fair to say your larger point is that healthcare costs are going to balloon to a point that it's going to take all the fun out of all this techno-utopia stuff?
Well, my point is that we're going to get richer, and but we're not going to stop using labor. That we're going to get richer, and we're going to want more stuff, basically.
Okay, so the natural human inclination, whether I became a quadriplegic or won the lottery, I'm going to still resettle to a baseline of happiness a year later.
Not even the baseline of happiness argument. It's more that you're going to humans have. Nears makes no difference in insatiable wants. That you're going to want more stuff. It may not be manufactured goods or whatever. You may though likely manufactured goods will be a part of it. But you're going to want to consume more things that are difficult to produce in some sense.
Right. Everyone's going to want that luxury that is the mystery technology thing that's super expensive, because everyone has diamonds now. They're basically like tissue paper, because sometimes
it's not necessarily mystery technology. There's a lot. I mean, there's human services are a huge part of it. Right now, I happen to work in law. I work in actually patent law. I work in a firm that represent people in the patent office. If you have trouble with a government agency right now, hiring a lawyer is very expensive. You only do it if you have a really, really big problem. It's really, really important to you. Legal services are a human service that really can't be. You need someone to explain to people in understandable ways how the law works. That's not something that you can really automate so easily, and that's something that could become much cheaper. As it could be the sort of labor that becomes more prevalent, and you could say, I want to.
I was just talking to a friend of mine. He's a Street Fighter commentator named Ultra David. I don't know if you know him, but I was talking to him just about this the other day. And is law outsourceable? And he seemed to be of the opinion that a good chunk of it might be. I know there's usually that higher level abstract thinking to construct the arguments and all that, but some elements he thought could, maybe in the near future, a lot of it could be robotable.
I mean, well, some parts of law are automatable. I mean, the thing we were talking about before was that we have 100 form letters for everything that can happen in the patent office at my work. But
that kind of thing, yeah.
But the service of explaining to the client what the law is and walking you through the law, there's not going to be a substitute for talking to a human being.
I definitely think there's a human factor that will be, even as it is now to some degree, some form of luxury. I mean, like, even the company I work for is an IT firm, but we do give a lot of human hands-on element to what we do, and people could go with cheaper IT, but we're there hands-on doing it. And
right, my point is that there's no reason that other than the scarcity of skilled labor, that has to be as uncommon as it is. That it has to be as, there's no reason apart from skilled labor that human services are so expensive.
Well, maybe I could explain it a different way that might clarify where I'm coming from usefully, hopefully. Founding in the United States, Jefferson talking about an agrarian society. Everyone's got a farm. 95% of the population is farming. 5% mercantile, 1% academic or something else, right? Engineers or you name it. And now fast forward, 1% of the population is doing all the farming.
Yeah.
And so through the 1800s, now you got most of the population, or much of them, working factory work. And now the population actually in factories doing the industrial part is now kind of this very small figure.
Even though we produce more industrial output than ever before.
Right, because there's we have the technology to make these things so much more efficient. And so that opened up the economy. Now we're looking at a service economy, and most people are operating in some kind of service. I'm missing another part of this, but basically this more modern set of jobs that we've come to be familiar with, and information is another big thing. And so, if a lot of those services start to get automated, then now we're just dealing with information and the creative economy, And then if all that information stuff gets automated, then now we just have the creative economy left. And suddenly we've got so much of that automated, and you're following like an average growth curve of, let's say, 3% a year for economies, and a population that will eventually level off. My take is that basically they'll just, when I say true wealth, I mean like stuff that you can do stuff with, like food that's there you can eat, stuff that can move you around and move you in time and space, and like a car or whatever's in the future, or the ability to communicate for cheaper, or all those superpowers that's, I can talk across the country, that's a superpower. I can move at 60 miles an hour, that's a superpower. Like all this stuff that more and more of those technical things that make us more and more superpowered on the average person. It seems to me there's just so much of that net overflow of wealth. There'll be so much cup flowing over that we can just basically, as a side note, pay for everyone's everything, because there'll just be so much robust stuff that we have that much left over, if not more.
All right, so I think there are two things I want to say here. First is that you say that we've seen the trends from going from agrarian to industrial to kind of service to maybe creative, or maybe is we don't if you had been standing here in 1800 and 1776 or whenever, there is no way you would have predicted the service economy or anything. You wouldn't have come close to it. I mean, the idea of mass retail. Mass retail is an old technology now. Mass retail was an unthinkable technology back then.
Right.
We do not know what technologies will come up, but it's not an unreasonable point to just say that if we're going to predict the future, which is inherently very uncertain, if we're going to predict, we should say what happened in the past, probably likely to see that happen again. We haven't had a fundamental change in the structure of the U.S. economy, really, at least since the Great Depression. I mean, there have been changes in the U.S. economy, but the structure is basically the same. We have a basically free market economy with some level of government with a substantial level of government regulation. We have occasional recessions, usually not too bad. Unemployment in the range of like 5 to 10% typically. U.S. productivity from 1930 U.S. income, U.S. productivity from U.S. GDP from like the 1930s, 1940s to now is like is 3 or 4 or 5 times up. I don't have the exact numbers. I could get a GDP.
Do you mean in real wealth or in like dollars adjusted for inflation?
Adjusted for inflation, after inflation.
Okay, but like is it still
multiples?
Oh yeah, I mean a 3% increase a year, I think, is somewhere around what the average is. Over 70 years, 1.03 to the power of 7's got to be pretty grand.
All right, here we go. Yeah. I got a chart. So real GDP from let's say from the end of the Great Depression is 1936 is about 1 trillion. Today it's about 17 trillion. That's real. So that's 17x.
That's an attempt to, and these are always imperfect, but I'll go with you on it for sure. Like that's an attempt to sort of reflect the amount of national wealth. So if the population doubled, let's say in that time, but it moved 17 times larger economy, then we're looking at each person having 8.5 or whatever times as much wealth per person on average in terms of real wealth.
A little more like 4 or 5 times because it's actually about triple population, but yeah.
My mistake. Okay, yeah. Okay, so then in 70 years, we're seeing a tripling of the amount of real wealth and prosperity on the average person. And
basically no change in employment.
Pretty much, yeah. You're what are we down to, depending on what numbers, 6 to 8% or something? On
short term, it's noise. It's 5 to 10% unemployment over the entire time frame.
There you go. Yeah, which is
within that range, you have recessions, you have booms. You have 90s, you had a really big boom. You got down to like 4 point something.
Was it really in the 4s?
Yeah, it was big. It was really low, really good economy in the 90s. But yeah, it's basically bouncing between about. And in the 80s, we got a little above 10 for a little while. In 2008, we got a little above 10. But pretty much between about 5% and about 10% over the entire time frame.
Yeah. So we've gone over a lot of these numbers and a lot of things I think we've been agreeing on. But where would you say you'd come down as far as where you think I'm misguided? Like where
I think that exactly what I just described is going to continue. We're going to have growth. We're going to have growth in the economy that we'll see a doubling every generation or so. We're going to see employment continue. People will continue to be employed. They'll find different work, but that work will be meaningful and productive, and the economy won't run without it. That we're going to see that will have some level of government support for people, but it's not going to be, something where it's like the welfare state is not going to shrink down to some tiny fraction of what it is. The welfare state has not. It's grown a bit. We had Medicare and such; they got added in there. But the welfare, the cost of the welfare state has not gone down.
Right.
The real cost of the resources to support the poor will not substantially decrease. It will be a real and substantial expense. You will still have people working. You will still have the large proportion of the economy employed. Mm-hmm. You will not be able to. It will still be a key part of people's identity to have to work and to be employed in the economy. What jobs they have, I can't tell you. What those jobs will be making, I can't tell you. But the trend of the past will continue is my prediction, because that's the baseline prediction, and I don't think you have good reason to deviate from it.
I would agree with you that most people will be employed in the future I'm describing. I think humans need meaning, something to do with their lives. Like, we don't disagree.
Can I interrupt? I think I want to point out where I think we disagree. And the specific statement you made that I'm trying to challenge is, you said that the necessities of supporting people will come to a very, very, very small portion of production. My basic counter argument is, we introduced a bunch of programs to support people over the past 50 years. It's been introduced in a large number of countries, roughly similar programs. Like I said before, almost everything but medical is basically the same in all Western countries. No Western country has them cheap. They're not cheap. They're not getting cheaper in any Western country. Providing housing for the poor is expensive in every Western country. Providing food to the poor is somewhat expensive. Providing income support to the elderly is very expensive in every Western country. The level of income support needed for us to consider the elderly having a decent standard of life is not going down.
And we're going to have more old people.
So we're going to have more old people.
The problem Japan's already facing.
So your basic point that 1 or 2% of GDP or whatever is going to support large numbers of people, that hasn't been happening, and we aren't trending that way.
If I were to look, I guess what I would want is, as a number, in 2015 real dollars, what the person that is on the government dole or whatever, just imagining someone who right now is in the 5% or 8% or whatever unemployed. Perhaps someone who has some sort of condition where they really can't work and they're kind of just supported completely by the government. What does that lifestyle look at? I mean, then maybe that's like a $18,000 a year lifestyle.
That's about $25,000 to $30,000.
Okay, that you can pull.
Total cost of government is about $25,000 to $30,000. I can find you a chart if you want.
That's fine. I trust your data.
But I actually know this chart from. There's all sorts of programs. It's actually quite high. And we have a big problem that as people earn, if you start earning going from $10,000 to $20,000 in income, we cut so many of those programs from you so fast that it sometimes isn't a good idea to earn more money.
Right.
But the total cost of, on average, and the average hides a lot of noise. For people with no income, you're looking between in the U.S. about $25,000 to $30,000 in total government support that you're eligible for.
Okay, so that number, if you were to track that number back to the past then, right, per individual, you'd see that number kind of start, and again, adjusted for inflation, real dollars, you get down to before the Great Depression, before the New Deal.
That number is basically
much lower figure, yeah. And so what I'm saying is there is also an increasing line as the baseline, as the bedrock of how low you can get, as long as you're, able to fill out the forms and do the thing, keeps increasing.
Yes.
And so I that trend is part of what I'm looking at, is that number does keep increasing. And you might argue that that's a bad idea because we're starting to outspend ourselves.
I'm not saying it's a good or bad idea. I'm saying that the evidence that this is increasing, that this number has increased over time, is evidence that we are not going to get it to be 1% of GDP. You said 1% of GDP.
Oh, okay.
You said that basic support for people will be 1% of GDP. Basic support is a large and increasing share of GDP.
Yeah, and what I expect that trend is changes.
Right. So I think that. Right.
So one thing that sort of makes me think there's an asymptote where it sort of will actually start coming back down again is. Starts with Moore's law but goes from there, right? So let's say if I have my iPhone today, right?
Yeah.
And I can, for a single digits days of work, purchase a phone that can do all these amazing things, right?
Yeah. You make really good money per day if you can afford an iPhone.
Well, I just mean if I were to have no other bills, right?
Yeah.
To all the money I made for like a couple weeks, I could probably afford one. I'm not doing math off the top of my head, but
yeah. And anyway, an iPhone is relatively.
Is that so? If it were 1959, now the real dollar value, let's say stays the same, right? But a real dollar in 1959 to buy that same functionality, you need to be Howard Hughes, and you need to have an office building and an Air Force base and rockets and things to do everything a phone could do. Like it would take billions of real dollars even corrected for, right? So there's this extra X factor of stuff we can do now for free, like Google Translate, that used to cost $35 an hour, or and there's an endless list of those things that I think add to the real value, the capability of things to be gotten to get that base block of baseline we're talking about, basic needs that we're talking about, but for much cheaper in terms of real dollars adjusted for inflation over time.
So so this is something that comes up a lot in the literature, especially around inflation, economic literature surrounding quality of goods, and that how do you price quality of goods into inflation and whatnot.
And it's hard. I know
it's very, very hard.
Yeah.
And so real GDP numbers. I'm quoting real GDP from 1930. Put a big error bar on that. So I'm saying 3 to 4 times.
Absolutely.
It could be either one. Even if I did the proper math, don't put decimal points on things. Macroeconomists who put decimal points are liars.
That's great.
But
when we're coming up on about 25 minutes, just so you know, we can go longer if you want. But
I'm finding it a little longer. This is interesting.
Cool.
But
no limitations.
All right. So my point about that, though, is that quality is not a substitute for having the basic thing. That housing today, basic housing today is much nicer than it was in 1950. Right. I have better windows than I had in 1950. They're double pane. They insulate very nicely. I have better insulation. I have better electrical service. I have better water service. I literally have a better house than one would have in 1950.
Sure.
In many senses. But it doesn't mean that the 1950s house is available to purchase. It does not mean that I could spend what I would have spent in 1950 to buy the house. Apart from land prices are going to go up because land is very scarce.
Right, which works against me.
Which works against you. But
except in the U.S. The U.S. has plenty of room.
The U.S. has a lot of room, but the U.S. does not have a lot of room
in public transit or something.
Well, no, in places people want to live.
Right.
I mean, New York is incredible. I live in the New York metro area. It's incredibly expensive to live here.
Yeah, I wouldn't dare it. I mean, I would want to be worth, double-digit millions before I get out there. There's a lot of decimal points to go on that.
Yeah. So, but I'm also up in Toronto, the Toronto area all the time. Toronto's done a relatively good job at this, but even Toronto is my go-to example of of having a growing population and handling it well. Toronto is putting up a crazy number of skyscrapers. I think last I checked it was about 130 under construction, 10-story plus buildings in just the city of Toronto, which is a lot.
I'm more familiar with what's the one up by Whistler, Vancouver? And how there's just rows and rows of these green glass new buildings.
Yeah, Toronto has a sort of similar thing going on. Okay. Tons and tons of towers going on. The price of land in Toronto is through the roof. If you want to buy a house in Toronto, it's going up like 10% a year for the past 10 years. $1 million for a single-family house in Toronto. But the price of condos is not really going up that much, maybe going up 2 or 3% a year because they're building so many of them. So land and housing prices have a little bit gotten divorced, but even with crazy construction, a huge incentive for everyone to build condos and really no restrictions on building condos. Toronto has very, very lax zoning. The price is not getting cheaper. The condos are not cheaper. Mm-hmm. You're being saved from the runaway inflation on the land, but they're not cheap and they're not getting cheaper. So this is sort of your best case housing scenario. Toronto is the best case housing scenario for you in all of North America, and it's not having cheaper housing.
I would wonder if there's an argument to be made for third ring suburbs like McMansions, and these like Orange County, Irvine, perfectly planned communities that aren't exactly in city centers, but they work really good schools and well designed and no traffic as the roads match the number of the density of the houses and well planned and I mean, if you look at something like, the combination of Uber, self-driving vehicles, and then what is proving to be an exponential trend in how much cheaper green technology is getting, and ergo eventually electricity to fuel the electric cars that are getting better themselves. And the battery technology is the one thing that won't get better awesomely, but better enough. when I see those things combined, I see where you live becomes less and less important because you can get anywhere for much cheaper and much quicker.
But my counterexample to that would be the gasoline car. The gasoline car is a similarly transformative technology.
Right. From the horse, yeah.
From the horse, or from you had some electric. You had trains. Mm-hmm. Trains, electric streetcars, a few other things like that. But basically, trains for any substantial distance. Trains for substantial distance. That was the real competition, not really horses. Mm-hmm. Horses are already out of date for substantial distance by the time the car comes around for quite a while. Okay. Cars are a completely transformative technology. They, Irvine and wherever, these places exist because of the car. They do not exist as substantially populated areas without the car. They didn't bring down housing prices. The car did not bring down housing. Mm-hmm. I have no reason to believe that the self-driving car or whatever they'll be great. I'm really looking forward to a self-driving car, and I can see a lot of advantages for it. But just like the automobile, the gasoline automobile didn't bring down housing prices, even though the large majority of people use it to get around every day. I don't think that the self-driving car will bring down housing prices either.
Well, I guess it's the accessibility to outer neighborhoods away from a
but the car did that. So suburbs don't exist without the car.
But the house that an average person could afford on an average salary did get better. I mean,
yes.
I grew up in Riverside, and my parents were able to afford a fairly nice 2-story house where they wouldn't be able to afford that if they tried to buy in Santa Monica or somewhere at the epicenter of LA.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that doesn't mean that the cheapest houses get cheaper. A 1-bedroom apartment doesn't cost less than it did in 1920 or 30 or so.
Well, I think construction methods haven't had an exponential turn yet, like other technologies have. I think you still need guys there. It's gotten better, maybe. It's not quadruple.
I mean, if you want to talk, massive technological improvement in construction methods, the skyscraper, steel frame. The steel frame skyscraper is a sea change construction tool.
Yes,
you can build. Previously you were limited to about 8 or 10 stories with brick and mortar. Mm-hmm. You can now build a 100-story building. You could not build 100. The skyscraper and the elevator. You needed elevators too, because no one's walking up the stairs. But you do have these transformative technologies. They're important. They're great. They've greatly improved human life, but they haven't resulted in scarcity, in the end of scarcity, or anything like it. This is my point. It's not that I'm saying that these technologies should have ended scarcity. It's that all these things have happened, and we haven't trended that way. The trend is not going towards basic needs being a very small percentage of GDP or anything like that. And because we've had transformative technologies over a long period of time, we've seen what happens to them in a large number of countries, in a large number of contexts, and they're great, and they improve our lives. They don't end scarcity.
What I would look at is if you took the average, what is the quote? Most men live lives of quiet desperation, right?
Yeah.
So let's take the average quiet desperation person at 50% of income average, right? Now, the everyday concerns of someone at that place in 1930 versus the everyday concerns of someone in that place today, I think are very different.
Yes.
And so what I'm speaking to is for that person, their everyday, what are they worried about stuff continues to get better and better and better. The stuff they worry about is more and more first world problems down to 0.8 world problems, down to 0.6 world problems, if you grant the weird decimal analogy. But, and so what I'm saying is that eventually those problems no longer include any of the things we need to be able to basically live out a life without concern that we're going to be on the street or not have food or totally screwed if we get hurt.
Okay.
And so I'm talking about removing those stresses has a genuine psychological effect that improves a person's day-to-day lives per Maslow's hierarchy needs, as a simple example.
I'm not disagreeing with any of that, but what I'm saying, I'm not challenging the idea that people's lives are going to get a lot better. I think they have gotten a lot better. I think they will continue to get a lot better. I can point you to, there's a really great study by a couple of economists, Justin Wolfers and Betsy Stevenson. There's a very, very robust link between income and happiness over a large number of countries, large number of surveys.
Up to about 80 grand a year, though, right?
No.
No. I thought it levels off around a 70.
Does not. They have really good evidence it does not. I'll point you to this.
Really? That's new. Yes. I got to. Would you send that to me? Just because I didn't heard it. I've been operating on the idea that it gets better up until that 78 grand a year.
They had huge data sets. They found it's a log linear relationship. So every doubling has about the same increase in happiness. So it sort of asymptotes off, but it asymptotes on a slant asymptote.
I wonder if there's someone working for Clash of Clans that uses that same equation to match like the investment over time to build the next thing. Like they must. Like a friend of I was talking to a very smart friend of mine, different one, who is like level 1,000 at that or whatever the top is, and 3 years it took him to get there. And now he's like, yeah, when I set my things to build, I have to come back in 2 weeks. Just whatever the timer's set, but because it just keeps doubling as you go further. It's like
right. But it's very robust. It does not cut off at 80,000.
I'm not surprised to hear that, but I wasn't aware of the new.
I'll send you the data later. But my point is, and a little bit related to that, I think it's actually a good data point in my favor. If we'll take my word again that it is there. Yes, people's lives will greatly improve, but I'm sorry to harp on this 1% of GDP thing you said, but you did say it a couple of times.
Sure. That's a hypothetical end game, yeah.
But the option will not exist for people to buy a set of goods and services that keeps them alive at 1% of GDP. That is my point. That is what I'm saying. Basically, if you took what the equivalent of 1%. Median household income in the United States is about $50,000, so 1% of that is $500 a year.
Okay.
There was a time in the United States. Doesn't get quite that. Yeah, there probably is a time in the United States where $500 a year in real income was the average income, or was the median income. Certainly, people lived on that. It may not, or $500 equivalent. It's
probably Abraham Lincoln's salary. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a time people lived on $500 a year equivalent to the United States. Mm-hmm. You cannot live on $500 equivalent in the United States today, period, end of story.
Right. It's granted that we're operating on like real dollars adjusted for inflation.
Right. But what I'm saying is that the basket of goods is not available. That 100 years from now, the basket of goods that I purchase that keep me alive and what have you will not be available. You will have to buy the better goods at the higher price. And that means that the idea of the very small portion of production going to support that would be able to support everyone is simply not going to be the case, because that basket of goods won't exist.
So the basket of goods, could I call that GDP?
No, I'm saying that what is necessary to support a human being is what I'm saying the basket of goods is.
Okay, so the cost of those basics. You're saying
the type of basics will change, and the basics that one has today won't be the basics one could possibly buy 100 years from now.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is that I want to lock in like one set of basics that would apply to cavemen or us today or whatever, right?
Okay, and I'm saying you can't.
but I guess my original point was that I'm talking about the standard of living that let's say in today's world you'd get it 60 grand a year, right?
Yeah.
So if we were to look at the real dollar income over the last century of the bottom 5% of the country, right?
Yeah.
You're going to see that go up in real dollars to what is now probably near its highest point, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to increase with some computation of compound interest. So it is going to be exponential, right?
Yeah.
While the happiness curve levels off. Even though it doesn't level off as fast as I was saying before, it does divide out by 2, so it gets a little less steep over time, while the other one gets more steep over time. So while the baseline poorest people with compound interest, as a comparative in real dollars, will go up exponentially, the other happiness curve is going to come up and hit it as the happiness curve comes slowly tapering down.
So there's
an intersection of those two. That's the point I'm talking about.
I think you have your math wrong, actually.
Okay,
So
help me out.
the happiness is falling down exponentially, and income is going up exponentially.
Okay, so if I've
Happiness is falling down at an inverse exponential rate. A logarithm, a linear log rate is an inverse exponential. It's 1 over the exponent. It's or not one. It's the opposite of the exponential rate. But because income is going up exponentially and happiness from income is going down exponentially, essentially, you end up just happiness going up in about a straight line.
okay, so this new study that you'll have to show me later, what it's saying is that help me out if I'm getting this wrong, but if I'm at 25,000 a year, then I'm, let's say, 1 of 100 happiness score, right? 50. And then if I'm at $50,000 a year, I'm at 75. And if $100,000 a year, then I'm at 80, 2.5 or whatever.
No.
And, okay, that's what I was thinking you were saying.
So it's saying if I'm at 50,000, let's say I'm at $50,000 a year gets me to a 50 happiness score, then $100,000 a year will get me to 60, and 200,000 will get me 70. So every doubling will give me a fixed happiness score increase.
Okay, so we're at 50, and then we're going.
Then I go 100. I double to 100,000, and my happiness will go up by 10 points, from 50 points to 60 points.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I go from 100,000 to 200,000, which is another doubling, I'll go from 60 points to 70 points. So that's the log linear relationship. So I'm going up. When I exponentially increase my income, my happiness goes up in a straight line.
Okay, so 400, let's say, is 80, right? So 50 is 50, 100 is 60. I'm just like visualizing this just very quickly on my little file here. Okay, and then 70 at 200, and then 400, 80.
800,000 would get you 90, and 1.6 million would get you 100.
Oh, okay. So we got it's linear then.
Yes.
It's just a low linear slope. I got it. Okay, sorry. I got dumb there for a second until I saw it visually. So that if that slope's linear, then that's a straight line.
Yes, per doubling. It's a linear compared to an exponent, because you're doubling between those. Those are not, because every time I'm getting up by a linear increase, I have to double my income.
Yes.
What I'm saying is that if you say that incomes are going to double over the next 10 years, then I'm going to say happiness is going to go up by 5 points on average. And if incomes double, and if they double again the next 5 years, even though it takes a lot more consumption to double over the next 10 years after that, they're going to go up by another 5 points. It's basically just a linear increase. It's not an exponential increase, it's not an exponential fall off either. So, but that increase in happiness is going to be steeper and keep away from the exponential increase in the baseline income of the poorest people. You're saying it's going to stay out of reach of them. It depends on the incomes of the poorest people. Well, let's say the poorest people have a 3% income in real dollar value, real basket value, right? Right. Then their happiness is going to increase by, if we say that 1% income equals 1 point, let's say we have a large number of points, 1 in 1,000. If they are getting 3% a year, then they're going to increase by 3 points every year. Right. Well, 3 points. Well, it'll be 3 points the first year, and then 3.5 points. 3 points. No. It'll be 3 points the first year, 3 points the second year, 3 points the third year, 3 points. It'll just be 3 points. Well, 3 points based on the prior year, though. I was saying. Yeah, but you're saying a percentage increase. Right, but you're saying a percentage increase every year, so it's increasing exponentially, and an exponential increase is what we need to get a linear increase in happiness. I got out graph paper because my other one sucked. Give me 1 minute, and I'm going to actually visualize this, just real quick. Okay, I'm going to find the study while you do that. Thank you. Yeah, because I want to make sure I'm seeing this right, because I'm not sure here. So 50. In a perfect world, when I get a little more polished on this, I'd like to have some kind of digital graph / whiteboard we can get to. So sorry, it's all clunky today, but okay. Just this accurate. This. Okay, so God, I hope this is visible. Yes, that looks about accurate. Okay. On a linear, because you have a linear scale on the bottom and a linear scale on the vertical. And that is real dollars as corrected for
inflation over time.
That's people all this. Yeah, that would really be based on the empirical data. That would be all people at the same time. So this would be if your personal income just changed, and that's would be what would be expected. If you can go to that link I sent you, there's a really good chart on page
subjective well-being.
Page 15 of the PDF, but it's numbered 14 because that's how papers work.
Sure.
But yeah, go to that one. It's
12, 13. All right, so I am on numbers at the bottom of the page. Okay, so annual household income, $1,000 on a log scale. So is this an attempt to correct for inflation and all that?
It's not an attempt to. This is all studies done around the same time. Mm-hmm. So what that's saying is basically we asked people what their income was, and we asked them how satisfied they were with their life from a scale of 1 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
And so the left axis is satisfaction, and the bottom axis is your income in thousands of dollars, and it's on a log scale. So you see each of those hash marks is a double. So it goes from 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128.
I see. Okay.
Okay. And you see it's 25 countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well-being with an income in the 25 most populous country. And every country has about the same slope. There's some variance in there. It's noisy.
Sure. We see a rough trend that's pretty.
There's a very, very, very clear trend of
compelling.
It slopes up at about 1 life satisfaction point per 8 times income.
Okay, so points out of 10.
Out of 10. 1 out of 10 for every 8x income. So if your income increases 8 times, your life satisfaction out of 10 goes up by 1.
Okay, so our middle. What would our middle point be here? It's let's say we say 40,000 here.
40,000 is actually quite high on this scale because remember this is a lot of developing countries.
Okay.
So if we take 8,000 is right in the middle of this graph, and we go up to say Turkey.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was giving it an extra 0. I got you.
Yeah.
8,000. Okay.
So if we take 8,000 and we're in Turkey, or actually, that was a good goal. Yeah, let's start at 4,000 in Thailand, THA,
mm-hmm.
right? So if you start at 4,000 in Thailand, you're about a 6. And if you go up to 32,000 in Thailand, which is about where the Thailand one ends, because that's about the top decile of income in Thailand,
mm-hmm.
You're pretty close to a 7. So if you go from 4,000 to 32,000, which is increasing your income 8 times, you've gone up about 1 point. Thailand has a somewhat flatter slope, so they don't have quite
mm-hmm.
big increases. Ukraine, you go from 4,000 to 32,000. You went up from a 4 to a 6. So Ukraine has a very steep slope for income versus.
Yeah. So we've got this might sound ham-fisted of me, but if I were to just lay that out but take away the logarithmic bottom part, it just makes sense to me.
If you were to lay them out but take away the logarithmic part, they would all curve down. They would all be curving. They would all look like they would start out steep. They would look. If you took away the log, they would look like that.
Okay, and then ultimately it'll, I guess, asymptote at 100. I guess, or not asymptote. What's it called when it runs out of uppage?
This will not asymptote. I mean.
Oh, that's right, because in theory it'll keep going. My mistake.
It will just keep going up. It will keep going up at an ever-decreasing rate, but it will not go away. It will have a slant asymptote.
Okay, and we don't have to worry about what it means when that breaks through the 10 or the 100 point on the self-reporting, but because essentially for our purposes it covers what we need. Yeah. And so if that's drooping down then without the log, we're just going over time straight, right? Over the same amount of flat time.
But our income is increasing exponentially over time.
That's right. So
over time, our increase in happiness is linear. Goes up a little bit every year, about the same amount every year over the long run.
Well, but if I put that increase over time on this, what I'm saying is that I'll get a different color here for clarity, but basically it'll slowly start to kind of just sort of curve at that minimal 3% rate, but those are going to intersect.
Well, what I'm saying is though that you're drastically underestimating the exponential nature of the 3% growth.
Which would work in my favor then, because once that line crosses the happiness line and the poorest people are at a 9, then you have my world. That's
No,
what I'm saying.
I'm saying the poor people are very happy, but it's not taking a small portion of consumption to make them happy. So the end of scarcity is not, will we be happier? We will be happier. We will be richer. Life will be better. It's going to be great. Good things are going to happen. But the question about end of scarcity is it going to be possible or plausible or in any way for a large plurality of people to stop working and have the economy be functional and have people have a decent standard, what's considered a decent standard of living? And my answer is no, it will not. We're going to get happier. We're going to get richer. We're going to have great new stuff that we can't even imagine right today, and that's all going to be awesome. But it doesn't mean that people will stop working or be able to stop working.
Okay, so let's take a hard number of what you'd need to bail out, right? Like you're good, you never go to work a day in your life, right? 5 million.
Sure. Much less than that.
Yeah, but we'll just for ease of math, we'll call it 5, and you say then you're living at a $200,000 a year just off the interest, right?
Yeah, 4% safe withdrawal rate is pretty standard.
So if we're not even adding in for technological improvement, with the 3% real value gross rate for the poorest 5% in the world, at some point those first 5% are going to have a real dollar value in their bank account of a real value of $5 million.
Yes.
And they'll be able to totally live off of that.
No. This is where I'm disagreeing with you. Is the real value of the 200,000 as far as the basket of goods that's available now? You can live on, let's take a little more realistic number. Let's say you have $1 million makes. You can.
By the way, I look totally stressed out, but it's like 101 degrees, so that's just why I'm sweating a little bit. I'm enjoying this. So
okay, so let's say you have $1 million, $40,000 a year, which is a kind of more moderate standard of living for bailing out. Let's just because the two
at 4%, yeah.
So for the thing is that you will be able to buy some fantastic stuff in the way in the future when a poor person would have $1 million in a bank account. You'll be able to buy some fantastic stuff with the $40,000 a year, but you won't be able to buy an apartment, or you won't be able to buy medical care. It will the quality of stuff that you have will be drastically increased, but the basics of what you need will not be so drastically cheaper.
Okay, so I'd say, I guess the base medical care one is one I have to concede would change over time. So I can't put that in my little box of like, I'm imagining like this perfect like unit of human sustainability the U.S. Army would have used in like 1945 would have been like one of those green tents and the canteen and the thing and X number of rations and like you have a unit of a year's survival for one human.
What I'm saying is that right now, for instance, I can operate a vehicle very cheaply because, I can buy a gasoline car that doesn't take, I can buy a car for a few $1,000s. I don't have to pay any subscription to own the car. I have to pay for insurance maybe.
You want to get a Toyota or a Honda? You want to get about 6 years old? It's awesome.
Yeah, I actually have a 10-year-old Hyundai.
There you go.
But it's Blue Book like $3,500. Anyway,
nice. It's perfect. Cars are liabilities. They're terrible.
Well, actually, about mid-2000s, they started building them like tanks.
Really?
Yes, the mileage is terrible, but they had such a terrible reliability reputation that they went completely in the other direction, made the cars weigh a ton, and built like tanks.
I didn't know that. Cool. All right.
Mid-2000s Hyundais, good values.
Nice.
Anyway, I can buy my mid-2000s Hyundai today. I can operate it on the roads legally, and it's quite cheap. What I'm saying is that the equivalent of my cheap, my mid-2000s. So if you had inflation over 100, you had 100 years of inflation over my $3,000 Hyundai would, whatever the 100 years from now equivalent of my $3,000 Hyundai is going to go up around the price of inflation. It won't be road legal to drive a non-self-driving car, with all the safety features that one needs.
Yeah.
That my car won't be road legal in 100 years.
It's worth negative dollars because it's just a
Well,
hunk
it's
of
not even
metal
worth,
that you
it's not
can't
even
use anymore. Like,
dollars that you can't buy its equivalent. That it would be, it was very, very cheap in the 1820s to get around by horse, and I could, go from town to town. All I need to do is some straw and a place to, some horseshoes and whatever. Now, to get around by horse would be really freaking expensive because I can't find a blacksmith to make me horseshoes.
Sure.
Because no one makes horseshoes.
But I guess in terms of hours of work to buy a horse in 1910 versus hours of work to buy a Honda Civic in 2000.
Yes, it takes fewer hours of work, but the horse is not an option, is what I'm saying. Or
sure,
the equivalent of the horse is not an option. It's not on the menu.
It's a novelty.
The things that are cheap now are going to come off the menu and won't be available to purchase, and certainly won't be available to purchase at the prices they're available now, adjusted for inflation.
In the future, you'll be able to buy something better for even fewer hours of work.
But you'll be able to buy something much better for somewhat fewer hours of work, not that many fewer hours of work, is what I'm getting at for a lot of the necessities.
But when Moore's law kicks in and we have stuff like 3D printing and all of that kind of coming together, there's a sort of value that'll come out of that that's more than the sum of its parts. Like so many of think back to Seinfeld, right? Like there's that old saying, how many of those problems in Seinfeld episodes would have never happened if they just had cell phones, right? Yeah. Like how many problems in 20 years are we not going to have because of whatever future technology? There's going to be so many problems just removed from life with all these innovations because, like they say, you want to make an invention, find a problem, find a solution. We're just going to keep throwing solutions, and then they combine. You take an Uber, that's its own awesome thing, and then you combine that with like Amazon package delivery and automated cars, and so you have this thing that does it all.
I think we're talking a little orthogonal points, and I think if maybe I can hopefully try and clarify, because I don't think I'm not disagreeing with you there. What I'm disagreeing about is I am saying that you made a specific claim about the basket of goods necessary to keep someone basically alive in a socially acceptable, alive and in comfort within, and I'm going to say this, within the standards of society of the day. That you don't have something where you are, where people go, oh my God, what's wrong with you? Like you wouldn't have.
I'm okay with that. I don't think that gets I guess I would call that cruise ship pricing.
Well,
the cheapest room in a cruise ship, they'll keep you alive for a week. Like that number,
Okay, but I'm saying that that essentially the things that will be available very cheap, or the things that you will need will just not be as cheap as you're making it out to be, because I'm trying to think how to put this. Sorry, I'm blanking here. It's a little late.
Take your time, man. I spent an hour on that graph paper, so you got plenty of points saved up. Can I make a stab at it?
No, I think I have what I'm going to say. We're not capable that in order for something to be really, really, really cheap like that, it has to be the focus of concerted effort at producing a lot of that thing. That there's even with 3D printing and that sort of thing, there's still a lot of economies of scale in the world, right? Economies of scale are not going to go away. Will you grant me that much?
Are you talking in terms of subjective experience?
No. I'm talking about in terms of industrial production and such.
You say it in a different phrase, because
economies of scale is basically the concept that it's much cheaper for me to produce.
Henry Ford shit. Yeah.
Yeah. I can produce. If I'm producing a factory producing 1,000 cars versus a factory producing 100,000 cars, the cars coming out of the second factory are going to be a lot cheaper per unit. They're going to take a lot less resources because there's efficiencies from making a lot more of something all at the same time, right? And that's not going to go away. Will you grant me that?
I think we're going to increasingly have more economies of scale and more.
But the economies of scale are going to be on the things which are demanded within the new society.
Okay, so farming will stop getting more efficient because there just won't be so much demand to streamline it all the way down to the final nub.
Right.
Because it's just.
you'll have increased demand for food and increased demand for agricultural products. Because there's a lot more to agriculture than just food. We produce a lot of stuff from agriculture that's not just food.
Yeah, I mean, like corn oil and wine and you name it.
Wool and cotton and that sort of thing. That's agricultural product. But what I'm saying is that the things which will be really, really cheap will be the things for which there is mass demand. And the things for which there is mass demand will be better things that will still cost a substantial portion of people's incomes.
The demands, like for me as a consumer, right? Like food 100 years ago is going to take up 70% of your budget or something much higher than it does for me now.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm saying just like those basics with the Maslow's kind of basics of hierarchy of needs of like what you need to just get your head out of the water and not have to worry about that stuff anymore, like just to get free of it. Like your overhead's gone. You've got that covered. If there might be a center of society that expects you to have something far more magnificent than that.
But what I'm getting at is the magnificent stuff is where production is going to focus. So
that's where the streamlining will focus.
That's where the streamlining is going to happen. Is the stuff that the mass of people wants.
So the innovation on the basics will basically level out.
Well, it's not that there won't be innovation. It's that there won't be efficient mass production because it's not massively demanded. If everyone wants a self-drive, so it might be quite possible 100 years from now to produce it would be technically possible 100 years from now to produce a gasoline car like my 2005 Hyundai for like $1,000 brand new.
Right.
Functionally the equivalent of what I have out on my driveway. But you won't produce it for $1,000 because no one will want my car 100 years from now because it'll be a piece of crap. Instead, what will be produced is a car that costs like $20,000 equivalent dollars then, but is self-driving and has God knows what other features that I can't even think of right now because that's 100 years in the future. So it's not that, you could make a Model if Ford were making Model Ts right now, they're dirt simple cars. Ford could make Model Ts right now for $1,500, $2,000. But you can't buy a brand new Model T for $1,500 or $2,000 because no one wants a Model T. So the cheapest new car you can buy costs a lot more than it would cost to make a Model T because that's where the focus of production is on the things people actually want today.
Okay, so we've got like 1890, 50 acres and a mule. 1950, 2-bedroom, 1-story, 1,500 square foot house in suburbia, 1 car, and single family income. In our age, you've got a 2-story house in a suburb somewhere with a
car for every adult
and the kids, and and 2 cars in the garage, right? Maybe a pool, right? Or whatever not a pool wouldn't be at the baseline, but this middle line, right? So that middle line, that 50% experience, 50 acres and a mule up to the 1950 suburb, up to what we're seeing now, right? Let's call it the McMansion model. That middle line is still kind of an improvement off the earlier.
Yes, it's a large improvement. What I'm saying is that I can't today buy the 50 acres and a mule lifestyle. It may be the case that the 50 acres and a mule lifestyle, if American production today were to focus its energies on producing the 50 acres and a mule lifestyle, it could do it for 3 or 4% of GDP, maybe today, maybe 5%, some very small percent of GDP. But because we don't focus our production on the 50 acres and a mule lifestyle because no one wants it, I can't buy it at 5% of GDP. I have to pay much, much more because it's a specialized weird ass product. And because production is going to focus on the things which are demanded by the masses in the future, I will not be able to buy a basket of goods that supports myself at a very small portion of GDP, or a very small portion of, at a very small dollar number, because it won't be mass produced. It won't be so for instance, I could not in Toronto today buy a new condo that doesn't include central air. They don't make them. Maybe I don't need central air. Maybe central air adds $1,000 to the cost of the unit, but I can't buy one without it because they're not making them. It's not an option.
And you'd have to buy
the list
building, which become increasingly rare.
Right, and the list of things which stopped being an option, you can't buy a car without airbags anymore. Airbags are not an option. They're mandatory.
Yeah.
You can't buy a car you can't buy a car with disc brakes anymore. 2008, we outlawed disc brakes. You have to have, or outlawed drum brakes, right? You have to have disc brakes.
Okay, and just because it looks a little weird, I'm looking up because my screen's up here, so I'm not rolling my eyes. No. But the okay, so like if I'm looking back at that, like you ever play one of these strategy games where you level up a town to a village to a city to
civilization,
something like that. There you go. Yeah. So I'm seeing a through line like that goes we'll just do our 3 points, which is 50 acres and a mule, through to our 1950s suburb and then our 2015 suburb, right?
Right.
And so there's a sort of leveling up of what that middle line is, right? And then I guess what I would contend is that middle line becomes available to more and more, a higher percentage of the population as that kind of base. Let's call that even the baseline. I mean, 50 acres and mule might have been awesome back then, but now that sort of baseline becomes more and more accessible as that stuff to create that baseline gets exponentially cheaper to make, and even if it's future.
I'm saying that the stuff is just, it's different. It's that I don't have the 50 acres and a mule baseline today that you had 100 years ago. That's not my life. It's not what I'm buying. The basket of goods that I buy is just a different basket of goods, and I
buy something that's more elaborate, more intensive, more.
I buy the basket of goods that is part of our modern society. I can't. I could only at great expense buy the basket of goods that would exist in 1890. Even though if we focused our production on them, they would be very, very cheap. It's not something that's available to purchase, and that's going to continue to be the case. Is that what's made new will continually get more. The cost of producing what we make today will get cheaper, but we're going to keep adding stuff to what we make today, and it won't be optional. We won't make the cheap version anymore. And because we won't make the cheap version anymore, you won't be able to buy the cheap version anymore. And so it won't actually be a real choice.
Yeah, because like someone today, even if you're very poor, you're not going to buy an iPhone 3. They're just phased out.
Right. You can't.
You're going to get an iPhone 5 or maybe a 4 or like a flip phone. If you're,
right. But you can't buy an original iPhone today. You cannot buy a new original iPhone today.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's only an 8 or 9 year old product, or however old that is. It's not an old product at all. But
okay, well, imagine a product like an iPhone. Then an iPhone can kind of it's an intermodular sort of thing that can sort of do anything, right? So let's say there's some kind of hybrid product, right? That is a combination iPhone, 3D printer, drone that flies, and can also, because it's a drone, it can build a house as it 3D prints the whole thing over a day, and you've got this device that can actually provide all these baseline items in one thing, right? And then that thing starts to get cheaper and cheaper, and then there's future, better versions of it. So I see that sort of almost inevitable, because you could just hand them out to people and they would do the stuff, like, eventually.
I think that's not the pattern of production. I think that's not the way. I mean, I think that that I'm pretty familiar with 3D printing technology. I'm familiar with these sort of things, and there is just no way that it gets cheaper than mass production. There still will always be economies of scale. The economy of scale phenomenon is, it goes back to Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. This is literally what he talks about, that by specializing the labor out.
It's just mathematically elemental, the nature of like living in three-dimensional time and space with resources and stuff.
Yeah, economies of scale are going to exist. Adam Smith.
I'm fine with that.
If we grant that economies of scale are going to exist and are a very, very, very powerful force, then the things that will be cheaply available are things that are desired at scale, that are desired en masse. And what's desired en masse is not going to be the bottom of the barrel basics for just keeping you physically alive. It's going to be something better than that. And so the cheapest thing on the menu will get more elaborate over time.
Right. So, but going back to your point about no one today is you have to go out of your way to not find food, right?
Right.
There'll be a time where you have to go out of your way to not have food, shelter, water, housing, and medical care.
Yes, but I'm saying that's been the case for quite a while, and we don't call it the end of scarcity. I mean, it's not entirely the case, but it's getting close to the case. And it's been, I mean, we've had food stamps for a long time. We've had universal health care in a lot of countries for a long time. We've had public housing support for a long time.
Okay.
You have to go out of your way. There's programs. I mean, maybe you don't have to go out of your, like, we maybe get better at outreach for the programs, but that's minor. It's been that way for a while. There are government supports for all of these things. Those government supports have not gotten cheaper. It's not gotten more efficient. It's not gotten drastically more efficient to deliver those basics to people. And we have delivered those basics to people for a long time, but it isn't getting cheaper or easier to deliver those things to people. The standards of government housing, you know, the quality of housing the government will find you for government housing probably is better. Maybe not a great example, but you maybe get better food on food stamps than you did 50 years ago, but it still costs the same amount of money.
Okay, so the social safety net has increased as a percentage of national GDP over time.
And not just because we've expanded the amount different things it covers, but because those things have actually gotten more expensive.
And the medical things...
Medical's a big part of it, but not the only.
Medical is a big part of it, but I still think medical gets cheaper over time. I see robot surgery and, nanobots preventing every illness, so prevention is cheaper than cure. Like there's just so many good systematic models that can be applied by smart, ingenious people that just make...
Can I make a point on the medical thing?
Sure, yeah.
Keeping people alive longer is more expensive than letting them die.
For now.
And persistently. I think so.
Well, I mean, I'm following an Aubrey de Grey model of it's not just life extension, so you just keep looking more and more deader, like a 150-year-old looks like a corpse. It's staying young longer.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's undoubtedly a very good thing. We keep people alive longer, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean it gets cheaper.
It does if you can, like, just a system, just a process thing. One thing that a lot of insurance companies will do is they'll offer free stuff that statistically prevents illnesses in the long term. So, preventative medicine stuff. If you, take an anti-smoking program, or you, buy a gym membership, there's some list of things that, they'll pay for, annual checkups that end up saving them money because it's preventative. So someone figured that out.
This is a little bit tricky because insurance in the United States shifts all their costs for elderly care off to Medicare.
That's completely fair. Okay, you're right. I shouldn't have used that as an example.
Right, because if I can keep you healthy to your 65, and then you and then you get Alzheimer's at 80 or something, and you're incredibly expensive to care for at 80, that's not my problem when I'm your insurance company when you're 60.
I can give you a better example. The recent studies that are showing that diagnostic capacity of Watson is outpacing the average diagnostic ability of a randomly selected group of doctors given a set of symptoms. So, you add that to Moore's law, and suddenly the hours of your work time that match up to the price of a doctor visit goes from, many to far fewer, because
but that doesn't
with Moore's law, cheaper, faster, more computers.
But that doesn't mean that actually less doctor time gets consumed, because now now a doctor's visit becomes cheaper or more common, which means more people get follow-ups for whatever.
But there would be a terminal point where there is a short list of things that hurt humans, whether it be injuries, diseases, something. There is a checklist, and it does have an end. And as we cure one more thing after another, or find a way to prevent, or even catch 20 years ahead of time one more thing after another, we're going to run out of stuff that kills us, which means we're going to save a ton of money.
I see that. So here's why I think that's not true.
Okay.
All men are mortal.
I don't grant that premise.
Okay, that we have a very fundamental disagreement.
Well, I mean, it's possible. Okay, are you talking like a heat death of the universe we're mortal, or?
I'm talking I'm talking entropy cell division mortal. I'm talking the probability of cancer increases every time you have cell division to basically 1.
Given an X number of errors per duplication, I think it's 100 or something. And then, what we do, we go down the checklist again. Oh, we got a problem here, errors per duplication. Let's put a little nanobot that fixes that every time. Like all these things are on a checklist that can ultimately be there's nothing in principle standing in the way of checklisting off all the things to eventually. And I'm not a fan of uploading to computer brain. Like I think that's like teleporter problem. It's not me. But I think if you can just start checking off the list of things that are killing you.
I mean, I think this is I think you're Deus Ex Machinaing me, and I know that's a little hard to say in a context about
that's actually
predicting the future.
Okay.
You're predicting a very specific technology that does not match the trends of what we're seeing today.
Well, I guess just to your particular point where we elementally disagree or fundamentally on the mortality thing.
I think for the purposes of what's going to happen in the next 100 years, will you concede that we will remain mortal? That we are not close
I think it's gonna be. If I was a betting man, I would say I probably won't make it out of this century.
Okay.
But I'm hopeful for it. But I would say if I had to roll the dice, I'm like 40-60. I probably won't make it to 2101.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm saying is that, but in principle, there's no reason why in 10,000 years, since knowledge doesn't go backwards, especially since the table has too many legs now, you can't knock it over with one Alexandria burning. Like, it seems almost like a one-way valve inevitable.
I mean, I guess what I think the point I'm making, and I really haven't heard a refutation to this, is my prediction for the future rests on a rough continuation of current trends. Current trends are pretty good. We're getting richer, we're getting happier, we're getting healthier, we're getting all the things are. I'm not a doomsayer or anything, but current trends are that the average person still has to, that to make ends meet still has to do quite a bit of work. That there is not, Mr. Money Mustache aside, there is not a great trend of people dropping out of the labor force and, just deciding to live off of a very small amount of money.
On that we agree. I think people will do things to earn some kind of money. I don't think people are going to put their feet up for eternity. I think they're going to want.
But I'm saying when we say a post-scarcity society, I think what I'm saying is there's a society where people work and feel the need to work to maintain a standard of living.
I think that if
people will work and they will feel the need to work to maintain a standard of living.
I think they will feel the need to work, and they will be competitive with each other on some level to achieve some sort of prestige. That's a human nature. All I'm saying is that a baseline of Maslowian human needs where we can remove the I think the parts of your brain that are jealous of your friends and want to compete.
We're going to go up the Maslow hierarchy, but we're not going to stop feeling like we need to work to keep going to get what we want out of the hierarchy.
Well, we're in complete agreement.
Okay, then I don't think there's I don't think we have an end of scarcity.
Well, not in the pure sense of there is. I'm just saying in enough that the basics you need to have what we would call today a basic middle class comfortable living will be available to the poor. The poorest person on the planet in 300 years is not going to worry about any of the things that even the top 20% today are worried about.
Okay, but I don't think that is an end to scarcity.
Oh, so it's a definitional difference then?
A bit, yes.
So we're actually in complete agreement about the actual state of things.
More or less, but I don't think that means an end to scarcity. I think that the economy will work about the same as the economy works now, and because scarcity is an economic term. I agree. And scarcity means that there is more desire for stuff than there is in fact stuff. It doesn't matter why you desire it. It does not matter that the desire is for a very basic keeping alive or is for some actualization of very high end, of very theoretical ideals.
Right. The Rodeo Drive of 2300 is always going to. There's some version of that.
Right, but it doesn't matter what. Scarcity does not ask why. It asks, do you desire more? And that will be the case persistently. That is what economic scarcity means: is that there is more desired to be consumed than there is produced. That's scarcity.
I think scarcity colloquially earlier, what I meant was we're going to get past the bottom 3 tiers of Maslow
Okay.
for the poorest person on the planet. So I think we're actually in complete agreement about what's going to go down. I think we just have a definitional difference, which
Okay.
is unproblematic for me. Might have been a lot of spinning of the wheels for that, though.
Yes, I think we did spit. We might have. Well, did I change your view about the non-falling off of happiness to income over time?
That was new data that hadn't been available to, and it does. So my,
I'm now just fishing for a delta.
the non-asymptoting thing, mine was asymptoting, right? It was basically essentially leveling off eventually. I mean, at infinity it levels off, but it has a top, right? And you're saying there's no top.
No, there's no yet measured top. If you still have that PDF up, let me find the table.
Actually, I'm going to help you out here a little bit. No, shoot, I'm blanking on the guy's name. One of the early, really great TED Talks where he drew a big giant square, and he had a diagram. And he said in the corner, this is all the experiences that are available to mammals. And then he had a bigger square. He says, this is all the experiences that are available to humans. But that's still only like 10% of this giant square. And he's like, out here, given future technology, this is all the possible experiences that are possibly available to any sentient entity, right? So in that sense, my instinct was to think that there is a cap at 100 on the 1 to 10 scale, but there might not be because we don't know what 10 is.
Yeah.
So in that sense, changing from what I was calling a leveling off to a consistently topping out one, I'd say would change my view with the exposure to that data, but actually reduce me to what my prior view was before I found out there was an asymptote, because before I didn't think there would be. So that's fine. That's a delta there on the presentation of that data, and I'll take your word.
Okay. I will just, by the way, point out to you on the getting to the top of the scale thing. If you scroll to page 12 of the PDF, there's a little table.
All right, here we go. Here, oh, just lost it. Hold on, I got
it. Yeah, it's numbered page 12.
Yeah, I just hit the there we go. Okay. Coming up to page 12. Okay, so this is the data that the graphs are then.
Well, this is actually some different data. They use a lot of different surveys for this study, which makes it a little more robust. They're actually, because they're incorporating so many different sources to give about the same conclusion. So this is what's your annual household income and how happy are you, and how satisfied are you with your life. And so you can see, basically, as your annual household income goes up, your percent answering not too happy goes down, percent fairly happy kind of stays about even and then goes down, and very happy goes up until you get to the over 500,000 group, where 100% are very happy.
And some of that group, they could have used a fourth category.
Yeah, that's the thing is there probably is a measure. Also, there were only 8 people in the category, so it has limited statistical value.
It turns out the overall data set's pretty robust. So
it turns out when you survey 1,000 people, you only get a very small number who make over 500,000.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's fair. It's quite robust to increasing happiness well above the because 100,000 to 150,000 is 60% very happy, 40% fairly happy, whereas over 500,000 is 100% very happy.
Wow. I'd be fascinated to line this up with the old one that I'd seen, but just based on your reputation, I take your word for it. This is the latest and greatest. So
this is a couple of years old, but it's Wolfers and Stevenson are very, very well respected in this field. There's a economist named Richard Easterlin, who originally had posited something about saying basically that there was not was the Easterlin paradox, which was basically saying that there isn't a strong, robust happiness income correlation above, once you get out of dire poverty. And they're basically saying they're saying he's wrong, but like not bad wrong. Just it's like you had like a survey of like 12 countries with like 1,000 people each. We have a survey of 100 and something countries with 1 million respondents and whatever. And the data is just much better, and it turns out that over a bunch of different questions in a bunch of different countries in a bunch of different contexts, we get pretty much the same answer.
I don't know, maybe I'm speaking against myself, but I just love the image of the idea that it's Hamlet. It's always Hamlet. We're just gilding the stage. It's like It's like the human experience is this universal thing with, some Campbellian limitations that we're going to get bored of and want to die. But as we just get richer, we're just gilding the stage. That's all, Yeah. And I like the feeling of that idea, but I think I do disagree with it. But it made me think of that. I hope that makes sense.
I get the idea. Yeah. Anyway,
I've granted the Delta on that one change, and that is, I applaud you, sir. But we've way over time. Do you want to do a brief sort of meta post game on this? And
sure. So I think we had one of the classic problems of doing this thing is we had different definitions of what we were talking about, and I probably should have, as the one trying to change your view, at the start gone on to definitions and said what is scarcity.
And I equally regret not blanking at cure on my own end.
Yeah. And I should have gone into more the economic definition of what I mean when I say scarcity, which is it's a technical economic term, and it's not something that everyone means when they say scarcity.
That's actually information for me. That's new. I took scarcity to just mean a general term for like, you could play Monopoly one way with limited dollars or one way without it limited dollars. It would apply. In a jungle, there's lots of fruit or no fruit, or scarcity is a spectrum of available divided by number of things wanting stuff.
Yeah, scarcity in economics is very specifically unlimited wants with limited provision for those wants.
Oh well, okay. I guess we're in definitional agreement on that. Maybe I should not have allowed the colloquial to slip into the technical from the beginning into the middle of where we went. So I should have clarified that too. So that's good note. And I do think that it would be nice if there was some kind of master, not a dictionary, like a super dictionary. Like if you were to go back through all of philosophy, take every philosopher and take every time they use the word good, right?
Oh God!
And have every definition. There's thousands of them, right? And you have like good sub 1, good sub 2, good sub 3, through good sub 5,000.
This was tried.
Was it?
You are describing. This was in like the 1920s. There was a philosophical movement, the name of which is escaping me, and that's bad because I took a couple of courses on it. A guy named A.J. Ayer was very, very involved in it.
AJ, how's his last name spelled?
Ayer.
Very interesting philosopher. I fundamentally disagreed with him most of the time. He was really
the
interesting.
best are the ones that you're like, damn, that's impressive, but you're totally wrong.
Yes. AJ, basically every time he read something, it was like, your logic makes complete sense, and you've just argumented ad absurdum to yourself because you just showed how your premises are wrong because you came to this ridiculous conclusion. But then the great part is just like, and therefore I support this conclusion, no matter how ridiculous it was.
Would it be like a Zeno's paradox where they're like, well, there's infinite units of space, you can never get there. But you're like, yeah, but the guy gets there.
Sort of, yes. But Ayer is very, very interesting. I'd check him out. But this was actually a thing of let's define the word good as people have used it, and therefore we can solve the problem of ethics. Bertrand Russell was very involved in this. They also tried to do that with logic and math and wrote this book called Principia Mathematica, which tried to derive all of logic from first principles. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it was a failed project. Someone pointed out that logic was wrong.
What?
That it just could not be done. They basically did a mathematical proof that what they were asking to do was not possible.
Did it come down to the whole set of all sets can't contain all sets or something? And
I don't know.
That is just something different.
Well, I was never a logician, so I can't. But look up Principia Mathematica and you can check that out.
Okay. Yeah, because I have sort of this dream that I could maybe not figure out what's right, but at least maybe just have complete definitional clarity between every conversation like this. And
the complete definitional clarity thing, it was tried as a philosophical movement. It was called analytic philosophy.
I have not been able to find a good definition of what that is.
Go on Stanford Encyclopedia.
I've read it. It doesn't click. It's like it seems to sort of blur with the continental or the.
No, but analytic philosophy started out as the movement of let's define everything.
Okay, but it got away from just reality testing though, didn't it? It sort of got off into a weird place, or am I off base?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's evolved quite a bit since then.
Okay.
But that's where its roots are, as it were. And so, yeah, there was this whole project of trying to define everything and and that everything was just this question of people having different definitions, and if we clarified everyone's definitions, they would agree on everything.
Right.
Turns out that doesn't really work.
Was it Carnap that said that it's all one big tautology?
I don't know.
I need to look these. Okay, yeah, because those are like these fundamentals that I keep catching on this Partially Examined Life podcast. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's fantastic.
I have not.
Okay, I hold your thought, but I'll just tell you this real quick before I forget. It's basically the idea is these are 3 or 4 guys. They knew each other in college. Some of them, they all thought they wanted to do philosophy, but then we thought better of it. They went off and did real careers outside of academia. Not that academia is not a real career, but that's the way they put it, kind of. And then they all came back in their early 30s, got together and sort of started this podcast as if they're sitting around a table at a bar. And they just go through one philosopher at another, but they're really good at like capturing it at each guy.
Okay, and the specific term for the let's define everything was logical positivism.
Logical positivism. Okay, that
positivism. Okay. Yes, like being positive ism.
Yeah, it's almost like if we could just clarify our definitions and before we move forward. And they just never got done with the clarifying definitions part.
Yeah. And so AJ Ayer was very big in that. But anyway, read anything by AJ Ayer. It's all very, very, very fun stuff.
Okay, I've got that. I've got logical positivism. And so I think fundamentally maybe where we disagreed is that you might have had a more professional categorization than I did going in. In some way, I'm almost sorry that I hope it was at least fun in the meantime, but that it seems like we're in what the state of things looks like, words aside, we're kind of in the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a complete aside, but this is a really fun quote. So there was one time at a party at a party or something that AJ Ayer saved Naomi Campbell from getting bullied by Mike Tyson.
What?
So Mike Tyson was forcing him. No, this is a real thing. This is a real thing. Mike Tyson is forcing himself on Naomi Campbell, who was a little-known model or something at the time at some party at Bard College. And AJ Ayer steps over to Mike Tyson and says, who's forcing himself on Naomi Campbell, says, steps in and says, back off, man, back off. And Tyson's just like, do you know who the fuck I am? I'm the heavyweight champion of the world. And Ayer is, I am the former Wickenham professor of logic. We are both preeminent in our field. I suggest we talk about this like rational men. And they started talking, and Naomi Campbell slips out the back.
Wow. Oh, good Lord. That's in reality, in our reality. This
actually
Big
happens.
Bang universe.
Yes.
God, I hope that's not apocryphal. That's amazing. That makes my life just a little bit better. That can occur. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you don't think we got a shot at making 1,000 years of age, 5,000? You don't think we can correct all the little things?
I do not think we can.
What do you think? What's the wall? Do you think?
I think cancer is the wall.
And just the nature of the range. I mean, because cancer is so many different things. It's just the range. Yeah. And you don't think we can put a better self-corrector on the DNA replicator? Like improve on the little, what is that C-shaped little thing that goes to,
RNA, DNA?
The one that, when it replicates, there's these little, you've seen the 3D models made out of the little balls and a clump stuck together, and they sort of do this, and they sort of self-correct as it adds the next ATCC,
Yeah.
There's these evolved little imperfect robots that get it right 999,999 times out of a billion, but 100 wrong each replication.
Yeah.
So you think the telomeres we might be able to deal with, but it's that level. You just think that building mechanism on that scale is just beyond the capacity of reality.
I think entropy really means no. I mean, that we're talking about something. It's already near perfect. It's evolved. I mean, we're talking billions of years of evolution. That thing has evolved to be really, 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 really accurate. That's. I mean, it's very small. It's molecularly small.
Mm-hmm.
you have to, like, this is not something that you can solve with giving it a computer because you are at, single atomic levels.
So you think this is like as elemental as like can't break the speed of light? You think it's like a law of entropy?
I mean,
like
I don't.
mathematical...
It's not. It is not as elemental as can't break the speed of light because I take that really, really seriously as far as
that's an 11. Yeah.
It is theoretically possible in a way. Breaking the speed of light is not theoretically possible. That does not mean it's actually possible.
Okay, because there's just some.
I mean, but we know enough about what we're looking at. We know enough about what the problem is. Mm-hmm. That we know, at least at the moment, we are nowhere close to touching the problem, let alone solving.
It is so distant as to be irrelevant.
Yeah. I mean, maybe 1,000 years from now, something I can't predict on top of something I can't predict on top of something else I can't predict.
Like the iPhone and the farmer.
Yeah, and let me also give you a link to AJ Ayer one-upping Mike Tyson and saving Naomi Campbell, because I found the source.
That's gorgeous. I think that's just a good topper for our listeners. Because someday when we're big and famous, they'll be listening to the first episode. Anything else you want to throw in? I mean, this...
I think not. It's already past 1 a.m. here.
Oh, good God. You've asymptoted. I'm sorry.
Yes. I think we're going to call it here. I would like doing another discussion like this in the future. Let's get our definitions right next time, though.
Amen to that, brother. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciated this. And that was challenging as hell. I'm going to be sore tomorrow in the head. Thank you. That was great. I really appreciate it.
All right. Have a good night, man.
Peter, thank you. You too.
Right. Night.